Before we start, just letting you guys know that I have a Twitch page where I play 4 different games 4 days a week, as well as a Discord server where I'm currently at my most active. The links are in the video description and top comment. Thanks for following and subscribing, everyone. Keep it up. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. The web is practically a digital Wild West these days, with hacking, scams, and cyber attacks on the rise, so it's extremely important for everyone to have the best possible security and privacy when exploring it. And NordVPN is the go-to protector from such threats. Perfect for encrypting your data, storing it on a cloud server, storing your password, scanning for any account breaches, and thanks to Threat Protector, protecting you from malware and other harmful sites. Also, with over 5,700 servers in 60 countries to choose from, NordVPN can be used to gain access to streaming services and online stores that might not be available in your country. Given all the countries you're traveling throughout this game, all these drivers on the track certainly need NordVPN. They're certainly not sure on the number of devices to use, with the ability to add up to 6 with a single account. And if you get the 2-year plan, you'll get an extra free month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So sign up to NordVPN today. Need for Speed and Nintendo. You don't hear much of these two come together as often as you might think. Throughout the 90s, nearly every Need for Speed title was released for the PC and PlayStation only. In fact, not that many games published by Electronic Arts came to the Nintendo 64, only a few sports games, as you would. Beetle Adventure Racing and The World Is Not Enough, because James Bond and Nintendo 64, well, they make magic by default. Though throughout the whole of the 2000s, when the Nintendo GameCube was nearly on par with the competition graphically, EA eventually released more games for that system, starting with Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2 in 2002 to mixed reviews apart from the PS2 version, with the GameCube considered the worst. Yeah, I know we're looking at the PS2 version, but it's all I've got in my collection at the moment. Nonetheless, it set the tone perfectly, as every passing title, no matter how good or bad it is, the Nintendo GameCube or Wii versions were considered the most inferior, since a disc for those systems can barely hold any space compared to its rivals. But after the disappointment of Need for Speed Undercover, no matter what system or PC you owned, EA announced 3 very different Need for Speed titles on multiple consoles, some exclusively. One was a take on the racing simulator, which I've already covered, World, an online-only PC exclusive, and another which was exclusive to Nintendo consoles, taking the arcade route to 11. EA's subsidiary of Montreal were formed in 2004, and with the exception of the Army of Two series, they mostly focused on spin-offs of EA's known franchises for the Wii, including SSX Blur, Skater, and Spore Hero. Nothing outright terrible, but qualifies the kind of Wii shovelware that people on eBay and Facebook Marketplace struggle to sell for virtually nothing. And apparently that's all the qualifications you need to make a Need for Speed title as well. EA Montreal formed the Nintendo Group and pitched it to their president, claiming they had a cost advantage with the Wii. They believed a port of the usual follow-up wasn't going to cut it, both creatively nor commercially, and a new dedicated title designed for the Nintendo systems was the better option, which according to Joe Booth, the industry had woken up to the Wii in the right way. And yeah, from a commercial point of view, it does make sense on paper. While not the most powerful machine, sales-wise, it beat Sony and Microsoft in the console wars that generation. It was a very popular system at the time, appealing to audiences beyond gamers, and its portable brother, the DS, was a runaway freight train in that market. So why make an inferior port of Shift when you can make your own idea tailor-made for these systems, down to the way it presents itself? The developers also understood that if a player had something like a PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and a Nintendo Wii, they knew that if they wanted the latest Need for Speed title that year, they would more likely pick Shift over Nitro. Believe me, as someone who got this game for Christmas in 2009, I know from experience. So what do you do? Well, they focused less on content and more on the core experience, according to Booth, taking inspiration from, don't laugh, the FIFA series, where the core gameplay experience was enough that you wanted to keep playing. Late 2000s FIFA, keep in mind, I did enjoy them back in the day, and made sure the experience was enhanced through co-op multiplayer, which is what made Nintendo's Wii series so successful, something you'd more likely choose if you were playing video games with family and or friends. Need for Speed Nitro was released for the Nintendo Wii and DS on November 2009, just a couple of months after Shift, the only title to be released exclusively for Nintendo consoles, obviously, but also, along with No Limits, the only one not released for the PC. I do remember seeing Nitro on the shelves when it was new, but as I just said before, I wanted Shift instead. I got a PS3 before the Wii, and that was it really, just slipped my mind after that. Honestly, the only reason I bought this game is just in case the time came to review it in the future, since the Need for Speed series is so popular on this channel. I'm currently going through it in chronological order, pretty much. It's also the latest most voted suggestion on Patreon, thanks Honza135, who clearly knows which game to suggest since yours always seems to get the most votes.
So you wanna be a racer, huh? I don't blame you, man. Looks like you got nothing to lose. Who knows, if you're good, you can make enough money to get out of here.
The first thing that caught me by surprise, but not in a good way, is how blurry the footage looks. And I refuse to believe it's the Wii U backwards compatibility, because other Wii titles that run on this system look a lot better. Anyway, I'm not saying the Nintendo Wii is a Wii console technically, but because you can't make a Wii game look like this, what you see is the best possible workaround. Make it vibrant with graffiti-style fonts, violently shaking cameras, like a polar opposite to Shift, a precursor to Unbound, or your standard YouTube thumbnail templates. Cars have a more aggressive style to them, with their proportions altered to look more like mini hot rods or like over-exaggerated Hot Wheels toys you had when you were a kid, while still using real car models and brands with the usual combination of performance, tuner, and muscle you'd expect from a Need for Speed title in the mid-2000s. There are some of the models of choice like the Porsche Cayenne, Nissan Cube, Ford Explorer, Renault 4L. A few head scratches right there. Like, imagine trying to customize these cars if they were in something like Underground 2. The developers collaborated with brands including Tokidoki, I Am 8-Bit, and Upper Playground to design the decals, graffiti, and logos, and whenever you're in the lead, the backgrounds surrounding the circuits change to the designs you selected for the car beforehand. That's a nice little detail. Unfortunately, the color schemes you see here, that's all you get. There's no color wheel, nor are there many secondary options when designing your own decal job, and additionally, you use the motion controls as your brush. Yeah, since I didn't know what I was doing, I decided to base my first car from the late Eddie Van Halen's Bumblebee guitar. That was the best I could do on my first attempt, but then I look at the other opponents, how did they control the Wiimote so precisely for their cars to look like this? Honestly, the only thing this game one-up Shift is the mirror tool, so whatever work you've done on one side, it replicates the other. I genuinely don't know what the developers at Slighty Mad Studios were thinking when you didn't have that option in Shift. But otherwise, if it's physically impossible to draw a straight line, you'll struggle here. And given its vibrant graffiti-based aesthetic, I would have at least added a color wheel to make the most vibrant cars possible. Pretty much the style on this channel. Though I'm honestly not that annoyed about it because it's a Nintendo Wii game after all. I didn't expect that much to begin with. Driving these cars, the developers wanted everything we'd like about Need for Speed but the quote, approachability and pick up and play of Nintendo. But initially I found it more complicated than it should be. This long tutorial reminds me of the Burnout games. I almost expected the narrator to say he was on Crash FM at the end, and the many different control schemes at your disposal. Now I know you shouldn't force motion controls in games that can play fine without them, but if you're going to make this game stand out as a Wii title, and if the Wiimote is all the family household had, you need to make sure it controls well enough with this controller. And honestly, it kinda does. I have a lot to explain since I have all the controllers and accessories available, so I can try every possible option. As you can tell, I created the save profile back in 2021 thinking I was going to review it back then, but I chose to review Hot Pursuit 2 instead. In fact, this footage here is from 2021, playing it for the first time, and as you can see, I can't even get off the line properly. It's because the Need for Speed series up to this point, including Shift, all you had to do was rev the car at a certain RPM on go to make a perfect start. But eventually, after a few starts, it becomes second nature. The driving mechanics are predictably very weird at first, because even though steering assist is an option, which I have turned off by the way, it feels like it does the steering for you whenever you're drifting, so nor do you have much control where you steer during drifting, but it stays on one angle instantly. It takes a lot of getting used to. For For this review, I'm primarily using the Wiimote nunchuck setup, and because it's not a conventional controller, it's more about knowing what all the buttons do. Fortunately, during gameplay, there's no screen pointing or specific swipes required for making the car go faster. And even if this setup looks too counterintuitive, you have the classic and GameCube controllers as an option. The classic controller is an interesting case. Having become so used to the Wiimote, switching to something more conventional suddenly feels very unconventional, especially with its shape, which is essentially a Super Nintendo controller with analog sticks, and I do not use it very often. There were even a couple of times when I shook the controller to trigger the Nitro out of natural instincts, when all I had to do was press B. And I don't like that you have to use the analog stick to move the arrow for menu navigation. It just makes it harder to pick the character's noses on the loading screen. Though because the trigger buttons are pressure sensitive, it's easier to get a good start off the line, and activating the boost is more reliable since it's a simple button press. And if you happen to lose your nunchuck attachment, there's even an option to use the Wiimote only, and I wouldn't recommend it. Like the classic controller, at least it's fun to experiment with. It's then I somewhat understood why certain Nintendo-made games force you to use motion controls. The difference between the two schemes, especially ones that require you to point at the screen on a regular basis, you don't need to overcomplicate the player with so many different options when Wii games usually have a rep for being easy to pick up and play. At the bare minimum, fortunately, the most common control setup, the Wiimote and Nunchuck, are good enough to get the job done. The issue is the races don't feel as exciting as the good predecessors. Sure, it's vibrant, the camera shakes during nitro charges, you get a good sense of speed in those moments, but also a sense something's missing. Like most of the time I stopped capturing gameplay, it was mostly because I got bored of it. It feels as though you overtake opponents slowly throughout the races since the grid separation from first to last is so far away. It feels that way nearly every single race. Instead of an open world map, it sets itself all over the world in cities that wouldn't come to mind instantly: Rio, Cairo, Madrid, Singapore, and Dubai. Although to be fair to the last two, they held their debut Grand Prix in those places at the time, and the circuits set themselves on closed streets like a PSP or mobile Need for Speed port. In a way, it's also similar to your typical arcade racing machine where the difficulty curve comes from road widths narrowing and faster opponents each passing city. I swear, by the time you reach Dubai, the leader, Jawad, I think his name is, good lord, he always finds a way to end up so far ahead of the pack. Even Max Verstappen would be jealous of his dominance. Feels like a minor miracle I was able to reach the Gold Cup in the first place. Now you have power-ups scattered everywhere like Mario Kart, which for a Nintendo exclusive is kind of fitting. However, they're bare bones to the point where they might as well not be there. One power-up fixes your car because, yes, they can suffer mechanical damage, take too many collisions, it renders your nitro impossible to replenish until it's fixed. And the other power-up triggers the police heat on another opponent. The wanted system isn't a case of individual cars having heat levels or trying to escape them, but more like a Grand Theft Auto title where the higher the heat level, the more they try to ram you off the road. Honestly, why are the cops chasing you? Each city feels like a player one in its infancy. It couldn't look any more like a street circuit with maybe one traffic car in the way throughout the whole race. And why does knocking over the cones increase the heat? This isn't a Gran Turismo license test. It has almost identical event types as the tuner-themed Need for Speed titles like Underground, Most Wanted, Carbon, etc. Including Circuit Drag, Drift, and Speed Trap, enough to know you're playing a Need for Speed game for better or worse. Drag races, for example, like Underground and Most Wanted, shifting gears manually is mandatory. It rewards you for perfect shifts, steer to specific lanes, over-rev can blow the engine, and collisions total the car. But it always seems like there's one flaw unique to every Need for Speed title that ruins this event. With Nitro, the draw distance is so short and blurry it's impossible to predict which lane oncoming traffic is, the camera is too low to see what's ahead, and placement is random every time you restart, so they just spawn wherever and whenever they please. release. I don't think I've mentioned this in my Need for Speed reviews that have drag races, but after playing Most Wanted on Twitch recently, I really wish you had the option to control your car freely in these drag races, not be forced to pick a lane. Mind you, there was a long stretch where I won on the first attempt like 4 times in a row. I don't know how I did that. The career mode has a similar star system from Need for Speed Shift. You don't need to place first to advance, though I'm sure everybody wants to place first, right? But you also get bonus stars for beating the time limits and style points, which are a good way to encourage the player to go all out with the wheel spin from start to finish. The only event that motivated me to keep restarting until I earned all the stars available was Speed Trap. This was the best way to teach me how the drifting mechanics work, how to do it consistently since it requires you to fill both nitrous tanks before the cameras to get to the highest collected speed. It's very addictive, and that in turn changed my song about the drift challenges, where I initially couldn't get a third of the intended target but found myself getting all 3 stars on the first attempt on a regular basis. Collecting enough stars unlocks the Grand Prix, which are essentially the same circuits against the opponents that appear in these cutscenes. It does get harder as you advance through the cities and the cups, but when you enter another one, and I check this every single time I was capturing gameplay, the event structure and all the cups are identical, right up to the order of the event types, whenever the test car is used, the same character intro cutscene for the city, so you're basically starting the game all over again, except now it's 3 laps instead of 2, and a slightly faster car, so you might need to push a little harder and watch those walls when going around tight corners. But yeah, this is where only 2 circuits per city, yes 10 circuits total, rears its ugly head in. Combine this with how empty they are, and did I mention those 2 power-ups? That's all there is. By the time I unlocked the Gold Cup, I was already sick of playing this game. It felt super repetitive going from one cup to another, knowing it was going to be the exact same cycle. But before we conclude this review, let's quickly look at the DS version. Since I don't have a way to capture DS footage at the time of this review, I can only show it on camera. Fortunately, I bought this copy off someone who had already almost beaten the whole game, so I can experience everything it has to offer in quick succession for this review. I like that the developers understood the limitations of the DS. The tracks are all different from the Wii version, looking even more like this belongs on a portable system, obviously. Even including a new city, San Diego, and the controls are simple enough that you don't need a tutorial to figure everything out. I was worried using the D-pad for handling would make it too touchy, but like the Wii version, they somehow get the job done without needing to resort too heavily to the Nintendo gimmicks like the touchpad, because it doesn't need to. And the way it uses the tag icons scattered all over the circuit to keep the theme of tagging your surroundings as you drive past. It's one of the rare games where going through rings can enhance the experience, unlike some games. However, the most irritating part of Nitro is the inconsistent frame rates. Whenever you're racing with opponents, it is quite choppy with plenty of slowdown. Fair enough, given the system limitations, but when you either have the circuit to yourself, gain a large lead, or opponents get knocked out during the Eliminator event, it causes the game to run twice the speed, which given how narrow these roads are, timing your slides can be quite tricky. Nitro on the DS isn't something I would want to take on the go on a regular basis. I would rather just play a Mario Kart title in that regard. I only bought it just for this review, but you can certainly do a lot worse. I know they relied on the gameplay to make you want to keep playing, but the lack of content does hurt it, especially with the cup structures being exactly the same. I'll give them credit for at least doing something different, and if you give the controls a chance, it's not bad. Based on how unique the Nintendo Wii was compared to its competition, it works in its favor. Like, you can't do this sort of game on current systems today, not even the Nintendo Switch. I feel like that on its own is enough to warrant a review, that and also because it's Need for Speed. I mean, I'll take this over Undercover, that's for sure, and I'm willing to bet it's better than all the Wii ports of previous Need for Speed titles that came before. But with Nintendo, you buy those consoles primarily for the Nintendo IPs, your Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Donkey Kong, Pokemon, etc. So this has to fall a long way before they can find a buyer. And the sales figures reflected it, not even selling 1 million copies on either the Wii or DS. You could have done better, EA, if you weren't insistent on pumping out so many Need for Speed titles in such a short span. In fact, EA, you could be better in general. And since then, really, with the exception of the Wii U version of Most Wanted 2012, EA have considered Nintendo nothing more than an afterthought. I mean, look what they released for the Wii U and Switch over the last decade. Mass Effect 3, fair enough, inferior versions of FIFA, and remasters of Burnout Paradise and Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2010. So I'm not exactly holding my breath for another Nintendo exclusive Need for Speed title, but then who else would? Thanks everyone who's supporting on Patreon, including Bibbs, Brittleback, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, David Myers, Eric Barboza, Atmosphere, Ian Walker, Indy DM, Mike Camilli, Malik Bowles, Sam Sneed, Tickford45, Thomas Rosendale, USS, VXL, everyone who's watched this review, tuning in on Twitch whenever I'm live, NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and Honzo135 for suggesting Nitro on Patreon. Now that I think about it, this is the first game on the Nintendo Wii that I've reviewed since Mad World back in 2015, when this channel was almost literally in its infancy, over 8 years ago. I'll have to re-review that one in the future, or at least replay it, because that game is awesome. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, click the notification bell, join the Discord server, support on Patreon, follow on Twitch, Twitter and Facebook. Thanks everyone, speak to you all soon. Spenny out.